Wait, Mary, it's me, a voice said. It was my ex-husband. I couldn't believe it. 10 years ago, he ran away with my son's wife, Sarah, and they'd been missing ever since. I never wanted to think about them again, let alone hear from him. But now, after all this time, he called me. He didn't apologize or explain. Instead, he demanded, I'm going to live at your parents' house now. You're still living with them, right? You need to leave my house. I was stunned. We hadn't spoken in a decade, and now he wanted to take over my parents' house to live with the woman he betrayed me for. He even mocked me. So, you're still with your parents? Have you remarried yet? You should move out as soon as possible, he said, laughing. For the first time in years, I felt a wave of anger, but he didn't know one thing: I wasn't living with my parents anymore. I calmly replied, if you're talking about my parents' house, it's not here anymore. Huh? He sounded confused. This moment was a turning point for me. I wasn't the same woman I was 10 years ago. I was determined to stand up for myself. Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Mary Kane. I'm 60 years old and work part-time as a teacher at a private school. Even though I've reached retirement age, I continue teaching because I love my job. Maybe it's because of my parents. They were both respected teachers, and growing up, I admired them and wanted to follow in their footsteps. I was once married to a man named Stephen. We were together for years before divorcing a decade ago. It was a painful breakup, and I never thought I'd hear from him again until his call today. Stephen and I met in college when I was 21. I was working part-time as a tutor while studying to become a teacher. Stephen, a new part-time tutor, had just joined. He was older, but I had more experience, so I was asked to train him. As we worked together, we became close and eventually started dating. After 3 years, we got married and had a son, Michael. Life seemed perfect. I found a full-time teaching job after graduation, and Stephen and I built a life together. Years later, Michael grew up, went to a design school in New York, and got married to Sarah. But everything changed after that. We were so happy for Michael when he got married. We wished him and Sarah a wonderful life together, hoping they'd build a happy family. One day, Michael came home unexpectedly. He hadn't visited in a long time since he'd been busy working as a figurine prototype designer, but something seemed to be troubling him. Mom, he started, you're still married to Dad, right? Yes, I replied, feeling thrilled to see him but also worried about where this was going. He hesitated before saying, I saw Dad with Sarah in Brooklyn the other day. I froze. Michael explained that last Friday night, he saw Sarah walking arm in arm with Stephen. They were in Brooklyn's hotel district. On his way home from work, Michael became suspicious and decided to follow them. He watched as they walked into a hotel together. I couldn't believe it. Stephen and Sarah were in-laws, and they always seemed to have a close, father-daughter-like bond, but meeting alone at a hotel? That was shocking. I wanted to dismiss it as a misunderstanding or some kind of mistake, but Michael had proof. He showed me a photo on his phone, clear as day. It was Stephen and Sarah walking into the hotel together, arm in arm. Then, it hit me. That same Friday night, Stephen had come home late. He said he'd been working overtime, but now I knew that was a lie. Looking back, I realized Stephen had been coming home late more often in recent months. He always had excuses: working overtime, going to happy hour with colleagues, or sudden business trips on weekends or holidays. At first, I believed him, but now it all felt suspicious. Could these excuses have been a cover to spend time with Sarah? I asked Michael to send me the photo and assured him I'd confront Stephen. After he left, I waited for Stephen to come home that night. When he finally arrived, he reeked of alcohol. The smell annoyed me, but I didn't back down. I went straight to the point. Stephen, I said boldly, I saw Michael today. Is it true you met with Sarah last Friday? Stephen froze for a moment before stammering, yes, we briefly met. I think I mentioned it, didn't I? His nervous reaction made it clear he was hiding something. His eyes darted around as he tried to read my expression. What did he say? Stephen asked cautiously, clearly uneasy. I confronted Stephen with the truth. Michael said he saw you and Sarah walking into a Brooklyn hotel together, I said, holding up the picture Michael had shown me. Stephen's face froze. His eyes widened in shock, darting around as if looking for a way to escape. He sighed deeply, as if he had no choice but to admit the truth. I can't believe Michael noticed me, he muttered. I guess I got carried away. Stephen, no, I exclaimed, stunned. He didn't even try to deny it. Well, there's no point making excuses now, he said, and then, He confessed everything. Stephen admitted he had started a relationship with Sarah 6 months ago. He claimed she had made the first move, and he had given in. Now, he said his feelings were primarily for her. 6 months ago, Michael and Sarah had celebrated their 3rd wedding anniversary. To think that was when this betrayal started, it left me trembling with shock. Stephen continued without hesitation. That's why I want to marry Sarah. Mary, I want a divorce. His words hit me like a thunderbolt. I could barely process what he was saying. I objected angrily, nearly losing control, but Stephen wouldn't back down. In any case, I'm divorcing you, he said coldly. I can't stay with you anymore. The next day, Stephen never came home. His belongings were gone, and a completed divorce decree was left on the table. Later, I got a call from Michael. He was crying. Sarah had also left him, taking her belongings and leaving divorce papers behind. She had disappeared without a trace. Stephen and Sarah had eloped and vanished. That was how my marriage ended 10 years ago. After the divorce, Stephen and I sold the house we'd shared. I moved into a new home closer to my workplace. At first, I was overwhelmed with sadness and loneliness, but as time went on and I threw myself into work, my emotional wounds slowly began to heal. Teaching had always been a rewarding job for me, and I found peace in devoting myself to it. Over time, I grew close to my students and colleagues, who brought joy and purpose back into my life. I worked part-time even after reaching retirement age, and it kept me active and fulfilled. Stephen and Sarah became distant memories. I thought about them less and less as the years went by. My income wasn't as high as before, but it was enough to support me. Michael also found healing. After the shock of his father and wife's betrayal, he poured himself into his work with passion. Knowing he was doing well brought me relief. Then, one day, the peace I'd built for myself was shattered by a phone call. "Hello?" I answered. "Mary, it's Stephen," came the voice on the other end. It was the first time in 10 years I had heard from my ex-husband. Hearing Stephen's voice after 10 years made me want to scream. I couldn't hold back my emotions. "What do you want now?" I snapped. "You're not here to talk about the good old days, are you?" My voice was sharper than I intended, but it was understandable. I hadn't spoken to him since he walked out on me. Stephen, trying to stay calm, replied casually, Hey, why are you so upset? You're the one who agreed to the divorce. Why are you acting like this?" I couldn't hold back. "You're the one who ruined everything. I don't consider you my husband, and I don't even want to hear your voice." Stephen ignored my outburst and got straight to the point. "Look, you're living in your parents' house, right? I need you to leave. Sarah and I are moving in." His words hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe his audacity. My anger boiled over. "Why are you saying this to me?" I shouted. Completely oblivious to how upset I was, Stephen kept talking. "Sarah's having a baby," he said, "but raising a child is a lot more expensive than we thought. Things have gotten really hard for us." He explained that their relationship had been passionate despite their 30-year age difference, but when Sarah got pregnant last year, everything changed. Both Stephen and Sarah quit their jobs to focus on their new start, but when the money ran out, they struggled to find decent work. They ended up working part-time to scrape by, living paycheck to paycheck. Now, with Sarah unable to work after giving birth, their finances had completely fallen apart. "I tried to ask Michael for help," Stephen continued, "but he refused to see me. I even thought about asking my parents, but they've disowned me too. They're all so stubborn." He laughed, as if it were some kind of joke. Hearing this, I remembered his family, a strict father, a strong-willed mother, and a serious younger brother. I had met them years ago, and I never imagined they'd tolerate such betrayal. How could Stephen abandon all those relationships and expect help now? "So, you're saying you want me to leave my house for you too?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "Yes," Stephen replied bluntly. "Sarah and our baby are more important than you. You're just a single woman with nothing going for her except being a teacher." That cruel remark pushed me over the edge. "Get the hell out of here," I shouted, barely able to contain my anger. Had I been too generous in my memories of him? Over the years, I must have softened the truth, because I never expected Stephen to be this awful. I took a deep breath and said in a cold, low voice, "If you're talking about my parents' house, it's gone. It's not yours, and it never will be." When Stephen demanded the family home, I told him the truth. My father passed away 3 years ago, and my mother last year. The house was too big for me to live in alone, so I sold it. I don't have it anymore, Stephen. Stephen was stunned. "Huh? What do you mean? Where do you live now?" I'm not telling you where I live, I said firmly, and even if I did, I wouldn't let you in. Don't ever come here. Stephen lost his temper. What about my inheritance? When your parents died, the family home and the money should have gone to me, right? His words made me furious. How could he talk about my parents' deaths so coldly, only thinking about money? Stephen must have been planning to take not just my savings, but also my parents' inheritance. But he didn't know the truth. My parents, outraged by Stephen and Sarah's betrayal 10 years ago, had disinherited him entirely. When Michael and I told my parents what Stephen and Sarah had done, they were devastated. They had treated Stephen like their own son and trusted him completely. His betrayal hurt them deeply. Before their deaths, my parents made their wills very clear. They left everything to me, including the family home, to ensure people like Stephen and Sarah wouldn't get anything. My father passed away 7 years after the betrayal, and my mother just last year. Although it was hard to let go of the house filled with memories of my parents, it was too big for me to live in alone. Following their wishes, I sold it, knowing they would have preferred it to go to someone worthy rather than Stephen and Sarah. When I told Stephen this, he exploded. Don't play dumb with me, you can't just take everything like that. I kept my composure. I inherited the property legally. Stephen, my parents wouldn't have forgiven me if I let you have it after everything you did. Stephen had done nothing but wander aimlessly with Sarah. He had no right to interfere in my life now. After he realized he couldn't manipulate me, he hung up the phone in frustration. I stared at the phone, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. How could Stephen, someone I had spent years of my life with, be so selfish and childish? He abandoned everyone who had cared for him, then came back expecting help. Just as I was processing my frustration, my phone rang again. It was Sarah. I didn't even know your parents were dead, she snapped. How could you be so heartless and not tell me? They were my in-laws. Her words didn't touch me. If Sarah truly cared about my parents, she would have offered condolences or asked to visit their graves. Instead, her second sentence revealed her true motives. She was only interested in inheritance and money. This only confirmed what I already knew. Neither Stephen nor Sarah deserved to sit in front of my parents' altar. I cut her off mid-sentence with a few sharp words and hung up the phone. Later, Michael called me. Mom, did Dad and Sarah come over? No, I told him, but they called asking about my parents' house and inheritance. On the other end of the line, I heard Michael sigh heavily. Michael called me again. Mom, I thought they might contact you since they came to my place the other day. Michael, are you all right? Did they do anything to you? I asked, worried. I'm fine, Mom. They just banged on my door and made a big scene, but when I said I'd call the police, they ran off. But I have an idea. Michael explained his plan, and I decided it was time to put an end to the cycle of problems caused by Stephen and Sarah, not just for me, but to protect my son, who was starting fresh. A few days later, Stephen called, sounding upset. Hey, Mary, did you do this? You're awfully quiet now, huh? What are you talking about? I replied calmly. Don't play dumb. They're coming to our house right now. Stephen explained that 7 women had shown up at the apartment he shared with Sarah. These women were Stephen's other affairs. Yes, he had been cheating on Sarah with 7 different women. Sarah had no idea about Stephen's infidelities, and when the women began shouting and fighting, Stephen became furious and lashed out at Sarah. Meanwhile, Sarah packed her belongings, and a massive argument erupted. I knew it was you, Stephen yelled. How did you even find out about this? Who knows? I said calmly, but you left me 10 years ago. Stephen, remember that. Stephen, in a rage, hurled curses at me over the phone. I wasn't bothered. Ignoring his tantrum, I said my final words. Goodbye, Stephen. Don't ever show your face to me or our son again. Then I hung up. The chaos Stephen described was all part of Michael's plan. After Stephen and Sarah had banged on Michael's door, he hired a private detective to investigate them. The detective discovered Stephen's 7 mistresses, and that 3 of them were married. Michael shared the information with me, along with Stephen and Sarah's address. Together, we let the 7 women know where to find them, sending all of them to the apartment at once. The scene became so chaotic that the police were called to break it up. Afterward, Sarah broke up with Stephen for good. Stephen was also sued by 3 of the married women's husbands for alimony, amounts that totaled over 6 figures. Stephen lost Sarah, his money, and his home. Now, he's homeless and was last seen by a former coworker at a soup kitchen. Sarah didn't fare much better. Like Stephen, she was ordered to pay alimony in the same six-figure range. To cover her expenses, she borrowed money from a shady loan company. Shortly after, men in black suits came for her, and she was taken away. No one knows what happened to her. With this, I closed the chapter on Stephen and Sarah, finally returning to a peaceful life. I remain single, but I'm content. My teaching job and the joy of working with students bring me all the happiness I need. Michael has also moved on. He's now dating a wonderful woman with a child, and they're planning a future together. I truly hope he finds the happiness he deserves.
As I stepped into the room, my heart sank at the sight before me. My beloved accessories and cherished clothes were nowhere to be found. Panic surged through me as I reached for my cell phone to call the police. Just then, my mother-in-law burst into laughter, her voice laced with a cruel amusement. Predictably upset, I see. What do you mean by predictably? She said, clearly enjoying my stunned expression. Her next words were beyond belief. Yes, that's right. I cleaned out your things. They were unnecessary after all. I was speechless. Why would she dispose of my belongings without my permission, deeming them unnecessary? Just as I was about to confront her, she began to explain. How long do you plan to stay in our house? Leave as soon as possible. I cleaned everything up to make it easier for you to go. You should be grateful. Her words made it clear. The mistreatment was meant to drive me out. If that's what she wanted, I had no intention of trying to get along with her anymore. Understood. I'll move out, I said. If you understand, then make it sooner. Please move out soon. Yes, but please give me a week to find a new place. Fine, I'll allow that. Just make sure you're gone in a week. With a week to prepare, I set out to find a new home. I would find a place and have my revenge. My name is Mary, and I'm a freelance illustrator. I took the leap into freelancing 3 years ago after graduating from vocational school. After working at an animation production company and saving up, I decided to go independent. When I told my husband Ken about my decision, I was relieved by his positive response. Mary, if that's the path you want to take, I won't oppose it. Give it your all. I'll support you, he said. Ken and I have been together since vocational school, maintaining our relationship through different careers, and we got married in our 3rd year of working adults. This year marks our 8th anniversary, and I'm incredibly grateful for his support. Despite initial challenges and frequent disappointments as a freelancer, I persisted. I continued to draw and post on social media, and eventually one of my drawings gained unexpected attention. This led to my rise as a prominent illustrator on social media. Jobs from companies and apps for sticker designs started rolling in, and my monthly income soon exceeded $8,000. I'm truly grateful for your encouragement. It's the result of your hard work, Mary. You're amazing, Ken said. I can't thank him enough. If he had opposed my decision to become independent, none of this would have been possible. I wouldn't have achieved this level of income if it weren't for my persistent efforts. Although I haven't saved up a lot yet, my goal is to buy a house and create my own workspace. While I'm grateful for the increase in work, our current flat is becoming increasingly cramped, making it difficult to store important documents. One day, my husband suggested a potential solution. Why don't we move to my parents' house? There's a spare room there, and it's only my mom living there now. What do you think? I was taken aback. Really? Are you sure that's okay? He reassured me. Yes, I've already spoken to my mom about it. Ever since my dad left with his affair partner when I was little, that room has been empty. Mom said it's fine for you to use it. It was a generous offer, and I saw no reason to decline. I agreed to the move, and 2 weeks later, we visited his family's house. My mother-in-law greeted us warmly. It's been a while, Mary, she said. Yes, it has, I replied. I've heard from Ken that you're a popular illustrator now. Oh, it's nothing like that, she said modestly. Feel free to use the room as you like. Come in, she invited us with a smile. I felt at ease with my kind mother-in-law and husband and was determined to focus on my creative work in this new environment. Thus, a new chapter of my life began at my in-law's house. At that time, I was unaware of the underlying dynamics within the family. 3 months after moving in, I had settled into the new surroundings. This job is done, I thought, pleased with the improved work environment and the significant boost in my income. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, 2 months later, life took an unexpected turn. My husband was suddenly laid off from his company. What should I do now? He sighed as soon as he got home. I was concerned. What happened? Was there trouble at work? Are you okay? Was there an issue with a client? He had been working in sales at a major trading company, handling industrial products since graduating from vocational school. I had initially thought it was a minor issue with his sales performance, but his response was completely unexpected. "I've been fired," he said. "What?" I was taken aback. "I mean, you've been laid off?" "Yes," he explained. "But why? You've been working so hard. How could this happen?" I asked, struggling to grasp the situation. They said our department was underperforming and that maintaining us was a burden. They gave me a choice between a drastic pay cut or a decent severance package. "It's effectively downsizing," he said. I was at a loss for words. I felt helpless, unable to comfort him as he faced this unexpected turn of events. The company he had dedicated years to had discarded him so easily. The next day, my husband began spending his time idly at home. I hoped he would quickly start looking for a new job, but he didn't seem ready to take that step. It looked like the responsibility of supporting us now fell on me. Determined to make up for the lost income, I threw myself into my work with even more dedication. Sometimes I worked nonstop from morning till night, barely finding time to eat. I wondered if I was pushing myself too hard, but the results were undeniable. At the end of the month, a substantial amount of money was deposited into my account, an amount I had never seen before. I called my husband over to share the news. "Hey, you don't need to rush into finding a job right now. We earned $440,000 this month alone. I think we can manage if we don't spend it wastefully," I said. "Wow, that's impressive," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. But there was a coldness in his eyes that made me question why I had shared my income details with him. The next day, my mother-in-law's persistent demands began. "Mary, come here for a moment," she called loudly from downstairs as I was focused on my work. "What is it?" I asked, pausing my tasks and heading downstairs. She stood in the living room and said, "Do the laundry for me." "But I haven't finished my work yet," I replied. "You can do that later. You've been quiet so far, but isn't it about time you did some housework? You're a daughter-in-law, after all," she said directly. Faced with her blunt words, I reflected on her position and realized she had a point. I understood the expectations placed on me. I had been so absorbed in my work that I had neglected all the housework, leaving it entirely to my mother-in-law. I realized I might have been wrong. "Understood. I'll do the laundry as soon as I finish this work," I said. True to my word, once I completed my tasks, I did the laundry and also cleaned the living room. I thought a break like this might be necessary sometimes. But since that day, my mother-in-law had become increasingly demanding. "You're always drawing, like a child," she said. "If you have time for that, you should go shopping. I can't imagine your paintings ever selling." Her criticisms piled on more household chores, and I found myself swamped with daily tasks. I was even woken up before 5 a.m. to prepare breakfast, leading to chronic sleep deprivation. My concentration faltered, and my productivity significantly decreased. Although my income hadn't dropped significantly yet, I worried that I might not be able to continue working if this continued. I decided to discuss the issue with my husband when we were alone. "Your mother seems to dislike me lately and is constantly picking on me. I don't mind doing chores, but being assigned tasks from morning to night every day is affecting my ability to focus on work. I need you to talk to her and ask her to stop." "What a hassle," he replied. "Why don't you tell her yourself? Besides, if you can't manage work, why don't you move somewhere else? You have an income, after all." "What? Why would you say that? I'm working so hard while you've been lagging around without looking for a job," I responded, feeling frustrated. My husband had a point, but it was difficult for me to address these issues directly with my mother-in-law. He shrugged off my concerns and went to bed, leaving us unable to have a proper conversation. And so, half a year passed. I was mentally and physically drained from the relentless mistreatment by my mother-in-law. Despite my exhaustion, my husband showed no signs of looking for a job. My work progress had slowed considerably, and my income had dropped to less than half of its peak. "I can't take this anymore," I thought one day. Overwhelmed, I left the house and ended up at a nearby park. Sitting on a bench, I felt a small sense of relief. After about an hour, I returned home, but the thought of working seemed unbearable, so I decided to take a nap in my room. When I opened the door, I was stunned. "What's this?" I couldn't believe my eyes. All my favorite accessories and cherished clothes were gone. I panicked and was about to call the police when I heard my mother-in-law's voice behind me. Predictably upset, "I see," she said with a mocking tone. What do you mean, predictably? I asked, bewildered. Her laughter was sharp and dismissive. Yes, that's right. I cleared out your stuff. It was all unnecessary. I was speechless. Why had she disposed of my belongings without asking? As I tried to process her actions, she continued, How long do you plan to stay here? Just leave already. I cleared everything to make it easier for you to go. You should be grateful. Her words made it clear. All this mistreatment was meant to drive me out of the house. If that's what she wanted, I no longer had any desire to get along with her. I understand. I'll move out, I said. Good, make sure you do it soon, she replied. Yes, but please give me a week to arrange a new place, I requested. Fine, you have a week. Just make sure you're gone after that, she agreed. I quickly found a new place to move to. Initially considering a detached house, I ultimately chose a luxury high-rise apartment to make a statement. I was leaving not only my mother-in-law, but also my husband, who was lazily depending on my income and showing no effort to find a job. Fortunately, I had saved enough money before my income dropped, which I used for this move. I signed the lease with the real estate agent and was ready to leave at any time. When the week was up, I packed up and prepared to leave. On the day I was set to depart, I filed for divorce from my husband. Did you sign this and send it back to the court? I asked. Huh? What's this? He responded, confused. This is a summons from the court. Why are we suddenly talking about divorce? He asked, visibly bewildered. At first, I felt sympathy for you when you were laid off, but your refusal to look for a job and your disregard for how your mother was treating me have left me questioning the point of staying married. Even if that's the case, does getting divorced mean you're leaving this house? Yes, I said firmly. I hadn't mentioned it before, but I'm leaving today. Today? But where will you go? What will you do? I've already found a new place, I replied. Remember, you were the one who suggested I move out. Are you really okay with this? He asked, his tone a mix of confusion and disbelief. I couldn't help but laugh. Am I okay? I'm more concerned about a future with you. I'm done here. Finally convinced, my husband agreed to the divorce. I was relieved to be free of the obligation to support him. Next, it was time to address my mother-in-law. Before leaving, I confronted her about the mistreatment. Why did you make my life so miserable? The harassment started after I mentioned my income. There must have been something inconvenient for you. Amy, thank you for everything so far, she said with a dismissive attitude. Honestly, I'm relieved I won't have to see your face anymore. Why did you start treating me badly? I pressed. Was it just because of my income? It's not a big deal, really, she said. I didn't like that you were earning more than Ken. You were making $40,000 a month at one point, more than your husband. A wife should earn less to save her husband's face. Besides, she added, Ken was paying for the household expenses even when he was struggling after being laid off. He's such a good kid, unlike you. I was stunned. All this negativity because of such a petty reason, and she believed my husband was footing all the bills. I couldn't wait to see how they managed without me. They were bound to face difficulties soon, but I kept that to myself. Well, I understand now, I said coldly. A wife who can't support her husband should leave. Goodbye. With those final words, I left their house. On the way to my new luxury apartment, I stopped by the post office to send the divorce papers back to court, formally severing all ties with my husband and his mother. I had no intention of helping them if they struggled. Once I arrived at my new apartment, I started arranging my belongings. The spacious room and ample workspace were perfect. It was time to focus on my work. After unpacking, I dove straight into it. A month later, I received a call from my ex-husband. What could he possibly want? I ignored it, as I was busy, but the calls kept coming. Annoyed, I reluctantly answered the phone. What do you want? I'm busy right now, I said. Mary, where are you? He asked. I'm at home, working. What do you need? I replied. I'd like to talk to you in person. Can we meet? I don't see why we need to meet. It's such a hassle, I retorted, about to hang up when I heard my former mother-in-law's voice on the line. Mary, it's been a while. I have something to discuss. Can we meet? Her voice, usually so assertive, sounded almost pleading. Reluctantly, I agreed. Fine, but I don't want to go out. Come to my house. I'll send Ken the address. After hanging up, I sent the location to my ex-husband, wondering why they wanted to meet. Once everything was settled, I returned to my work. About 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. They had arrived. "So, this is your place. It's amazing," they remarked. "If you just want to chat, leave. If there's something serious, speak quickly," I said, trying to cut to the point. Wait. Open the door," they pleaded. On the monitor, I saw my ex-husband and his mother. I unlocked the door and let them in. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. "Please wait a moment," I said, opening the door to greet them. They seemed stunned by the appearance of my home. "Incredible. It's like a hotel," they exclaimed. "Mary, you live in such a gorgeous place." Their reaction was almost like that of tourists, despite supposedly having a serious matter to discuss. "So, what do you want?" I asked, trying to sound as blunt as possible. "If there's no real issue, please leave. You're interrupting my work." Suddenly, they spoke in a panic. "Mary, we need your help. We can't afford our living expenses. Even our electricity, gas, and water have been cut off. Could you help us even a little?" "Why should I?" I asked. I had no intention of helping them, especially after all they'd put me through. "Don't joke with me. Why should I help you?" I said, incredulous. "You live in such a grand place, you can afford to help a little," they argued. "We were once family, and I admit I made mistakes. Can't you help us just a bit?" Their audacity was beyond belief. "I worked incredibly hard to get here," I replied, my frustration rising. "Even before our divorce, I was supporting your lifestyle despite the harassment from my mother-in-law that cost me jobs. You wouldn't understand the effort I put in. You just exploited me and relied on my income." Their silence was all the response I needed. "This conversation is over. If you come back, I'll call the police. Goodbye. I never want to see you again." "Wait, Mary, so what should we do now?" they asked, almost impressively persistent despite everything. "That's not my problem. You could start working part-time or find other means of support. Figure it out yourselves. I've made it clear I'm not inclined to help those who've been ignoring me," I said, my voice rising with pent-up frustration. I yelled at his mother, and their shocked expressions told me they were finally grasping their situation. They hurriedly left, and I felt a sense of satisfaction watching them go. Their desperation, so different from their previous arrogance, was unforgettable. Helping them was out of the question. I returned to my work, determined to move on. A month later, I finished work early one day and planned to enjoy some free time. I remembered I hadn't opened the living room curtains, so I pulled them back and glanced outside. To my surprise, I saw my former mother-in-law and ex-husband walking around my apartment building. "They're still persistent," I thought, noting that they didn't come to my door. They were probably mindful of my warning. Curious, I decided to take a closer look. I watched them from the window and then made a call. "Hello? What are you doing?" "What do you mean, what are we doing?" my ex-husband replied, sounding defensive. "We're just walking around. I can see you from here." "Don't make me call the police," I said. "No, we're here, but we're not doing anything wrong," he insisted. "So what do you want? You came to ask for my help, didn't you?" "Well, yes, but I've started working as a contract worker, and I hadn't received my salary yet." "Could you lend me some money? I'll pay you back," he pleaded. "It took being cornered to finally get you to ask for help. It's good you found a job. If you're working, you should be able to borrow from someone else before coming to me. Goodbye." I ended the call abruptly. About an hour later, I heard police sirens in the distance. Excitedly, I approached the window and saw my ex-husband and his mother being escorted into a police car. I hadn't called the police myself. Someone else must have reported their suspicious behavior. After this incident, they seemed to have completely given up on relying on me. I didn't see them again, and I made sure to delete my ex-husband's contact information and change my phone number. From now on, I was living my life for myself.
When I ventured into a town I seldom visited for shopping, I stumbled upon a disconcerting sight. My husband and mother walking arm in arm, sharing intimate kisses without a hint of concern for onlookers. Overwhelmed with shock, I confronted them, only to find them unapologetic, even justifying their actions. Swiftly, I divulged the shocking revelation to my father and opted for a divorce. However, life took an unexpected turn after my father's demise, leading me to cross paths with my mother and ex-husband once again. Years had passed, and as I laid eyes on my mother, her visibly pregnant belly spoke volumes. Catching my gaze, she smirked in triumph. "Ah, you've noticed. There's a little one growing in here. It seems like you've been yearning for this for quite a while, struggling with infertility. Well, we managed to achieve it effortlessly. Now I can finally embrace fatherhood." The decision to part ways had been a wise one. They aimed to hurt me with insults, but to their dismay, I remained impervious to their attempts. "That's quite amusing. The two of you look utterly foolish together," I remarked, laughter bubbling within me. My name is Emily, a 24-year-old office worker, born to young parents entangled in a whirlwind romance. My parents, Linda and Ken, married hastily due to my arrival during their high school years. Initially, their union appeared promising, with my father actively involved in my early years. However, a workplace accident left him physically impaired, triggering a drastic change in my mother's demeanor. As my father struggled with rehabilitation, my mother's indifference and disdain for him became evident. She spewed insults and mockery, creating a strained environment. Despite financial challenges, my father's perseverance allowed him to walk again, but my mother's coldness persisted. Growing up, my mother vented her discontent about my father, creating a rift between them. Our family struggled financially, and my mother's night shifts left me primarily under my father's care. Graduating from high school, my dreams of college were dashed by my mother's insistence that I work to support the family. "I'm sorry, Emily. My condition has forced this life upon you. Don't apologize, Dad. I'm content if it eases your burden." After years of hard work, I married Michael, hoping to create a warm family unlike my parents' strained relationship. However, the joy turned to frustration when conceiving proved elusive, and Michael shifted the blame entirely onto me. "I wanted kids too, but it seems you're the issue. Why can't we have children?" Desperate, I suggested seeking medical advice, but Michael stubbornly blamed me and refused infertility treatments. As my efforts to conceive faltered, suspicions arose about his fidelity, fueled by late-night returns with the scent of perfume lingering on his clothes. The journey that began with familial betrayal had woven into a tale of personal resilience and strength. Further scrutiny of the credit card statements unveiled unexplained expenditures, deepening my suspicions. Direct confrontation with my husband seemed fruitless, anticipating his evasion of the inquiry. The opportune moment to address my concerns emerged during an unexpected visit to a town I rarely frequented for shopping. Spotting my husband, who claimed to be working that day, walking with a woman by his side stirred curiosity. "Is that Michael? He was supposed to be working today," I mused, ready to call out to him. My surprise intensified when I identified the woman accompanying him. It was my mother. Since marrying, I had maintained distance from her, seldom bringing my husband to my parents' house. Observing them discreetly, my astonishment peaked as they held hands and kissed. Unable to contain my shock, I confronted them, chasing after the unexpected duo. "Hey, Michael." "Mom." Caught off guard, they halted, feigning surprise. My mother attempted to downplay the situation, claiming they merely ran into each other and exchanged pleasantries. Approaching my mother, I discerned a familiar scent, one I had encountered on my husband's clothes after his late-night returns. Reluctantly, I concluded that my mother was his clandestine partner. "Don't lie, I saw it. You and Michael kissing." Their denials crumbled under the weight of my revelation. Admitting their deceit, my mother revealed her involvement with Michael. "Huh, you must be mistaken. We just happened to bump into each other, that's all. I didn't think we'd be found out so soon," she protested. Their web of deception unraveled further as my husband confessed his preference for older women, specifically naming my mother Linda. "Sorry, Emily. I did feel bad for you, but I've liked Michael since we first met," my mother confessed, laying bare the painful betrayal. My mother and husband shamelessly confessed to shocking revelations. It was just a chance encounter, and things unfolded while having tea. I'm young and crave love experiences, my husband admitted unabashedly. With our marriage already strained, talking to Linda intensified my attraction towards her, he confessed. Acknowledging the information, my mother addressed our fertility struggles, adding, Michael desired a boy, and unfortunately, because of you. Unable to comprehend the depths of their betrayal, I confronted them about divulging our private matters to my mother. You talked about our issues with my mom? It's true, isn't it? You blame me for not having kids. Incredibly, my husband had aired our intimate struggles to my mother, portraying himself as the victim. Anger surged within me, realizing the impossibility of sustaining this marriage. You're the worst. Do you even realize what you've done? I yelled at the pair, exhausted by their feeble justifications. I can't help it. Your failure as a wife and a woman led to this, he retorted callously. Well, I don't mean a husband like you. Seeking liberation, I declared, I want a divorce. I've grown tired of your constant excuses and inability to have kids. It'll be a relief to be free of a useless wife like you. Apologizing insincerely, my mother remarked, I didn't mean to, but it seems like taking your precious husband away. My bad. Unmoved by her false remorse, I issued a warning. If I disclose this affair to Dad, your divorce is imminent. Brace yourself. My mother's demeanor shifted at the revelation, but she swiftly regained her composure. Well, there's no concrete evidence of our affair. Your divorce with Michael is your business. I'll divorce when I feel like it. Let's go, she declared, prompting Michael to hastily abandon me. Despite their evident infidelity, my mother displayed no urgency in divorcing my father. In stark contrast, I promptly headed to my parents' house and disclosed everything to my father. So that's what's been happening, huh? I endured that woman for years, thinking it would be better for you to have a mother. I never expected her to be this terrible to her own daughter. My father expressed his disappointment with a bitter glance. I've decided to divorce Michael. I can't stay married after what happened. What about Mom? I inquired. Don't worry. I have a plan. I won't let them have their way, my father assured. Later, Michael sent the completed divorce forms, which I signed, formalizing our separation. My mother, however, never returned home, apparently eloping with Michael. Despite the frustration, my father advised me to let go of them both, and I chose to move on from my ex-husband and my mother. Leaving the apartment I shared with Michael, I returned to my parents' house. Ironically, my father had become adept at taking care of himself, thanks to my mother's lack of assistance. Though the outcome was unfortunate, I found solace in returning to my roots. It's good to be living with you again, Emily. Thank you for coming back, my father expressed his gratitude. A fleeting period of tranquility with my father was abruptly disrupted by his contraction of the prevalent pneumonia, thrusting him into a perilous struggle between life and death. Emily, I've burdened you greatly, and I'm sincerely sorry. Live your life as you see fit. My father, teetering on the edge of consciousness, tightly held my hand and imparted those parting words. I tearfully nodded in response. Despite concerted efforts to combat the illness, his health deteriorated rapidly, leading to his eventual demise. Dad, I can't fathom your sudden departure. I wish I had been there more for you. I lamented while grappling with the preparations for his funeral. In the midst of my grief, an unwelcome pair arrived unannounced at our doorstep. A long time no see. Heard he died. My mother, and to my dismay, my ex-husband Michael stood there, their faces adorned with disagreeable smiles. They intruded with a brazen sense of entitlement. Why are you here? Leave. Who do you think you are? I am his wife. It's only natural for a wife to be present when her husband passes, my mother asserted. How dare you say that after abandoning us for years? Ah, yes, say what you want. Regardless of your objections, I am his wife. That entitles me to the inheritance. Wasn't there insurance? Disgusting. So, you never divorced Dad for this reason. Reflecting on my father's journey, Despite lacking formal education and retiring from construction work due to injuries, he ascended to a respected position in a later joined company. His perseverance, honed during his time as a craftsman, endeared him to colleagues. My mother's decision to abstain from divorce now seemed strategic, securing a share of his hard-earned legacy. Now let's discuss the division of property. Knowing him, he wasn't driven by material desires, so I'm aware he saved up quite a sum, my mother suggested, pushing the conversation forward. It was then that I noticed something peculiar about her. She was dressed in maternity clothes, and her belly was notably large. Catching my gaze, she chuckled triumphantly. "Oh, you've noticed. Yes, I'm carrying Michael's child. Unlike you, Emily, who couldn't conceive. We succeeded right away. Breaking up with you was truly the best decision. Now I can finally become a father." They proceeded to hurl hurtful insults, attempting to inflict maximum pain. Yet their efforts proved futile. I remained unaffected. "That's amusing. Both of you look so foolish together," I laughed, holding my stomach, as they stared dumbfounded. "What's so funny? This is just ridiculous. But are you certain that child is truly Michael's?" My question irritated Michael, but my mother's composure wavered. Her eyes darted around, revealing a visible unease, though Michael remained oblivious. "It's undoubtedly my child. Don't make baseless accusations out of bitterness." "Yes, exactly. No need to be bitter." We'll see if it's baseless once you see this." Stepping away, I returned with the document in hand, presenting it to them. "What's this all about?" What? Why are you so surprised? It can't be that significant. What's the meaning of this?" Both were taken aback by the document. A detective agency's investigation report summarizing my mother's social interactions. After my mother eloped with Michael, I coincidentally spotted her in the city. However, she wasn't with Michael, but with a young man I didn't recognize. Following them discreetly, they entered a hotel together. What does this mean? Could it be that Mom is? Having consulted with my father during his lifetime, I opted to investigate my mother's behavior, sensing its potential usefulness. The detective agency's findings confirmed my suspicions. My mother was deeply entangled with a man other than Michael. As Michael read the document with disbelief, he cast accusing glares at my mother standing beside him. "What on earth? Were you deceiving me? This is absurd. Emily is lying. The child in my belly is undoubtedly yours." Despite her flustered state, my mother vehemently insisted that the baby was Michael's. "Whom do you believe, Emily or me?" "Oh, that's convenient. Accusing your own mother just because you couldn't have children. What a terrible woman." Michael, swayed by my mother, regained his composure. They dismissed the report as false and resumed blaming me. "Believe what you want, but unfortunately, there's concrete evidence. You can come out now." Summoning someone from the next room, a man entered. "Who's that? I don't know him." Both were puzzled by the appearance of the unfamiliar man. "This is my husband. You wouldn't know him, of course, because after you, I remarried him. His name is Tom. I met him through a friend a year after divorcing Michael and remarried him. How does this man prove anything? Unlike with you, I am genuinely pregnant with this child. So what? Speak plainly. Don't you get it? I couldn't conceive with you, no matter how hard we tried, but with Tom, I got pregnant right away." The implication of my words dawned on Michael, and his eyes widened. "You avoided going to the clinic because it was a hassle. But I had tests done, and there were no issues with my fertility, so the problem was with you." "That's a lie. But it's strange, isn't it? Supposedly, you have infertility issues, yet my mother is pregnant. Are you sure that baby is yours?" Confronted with my question, Michael couldn't argue back and turned his glare towards Linda beside him. "Hey, tell me the truth." "Ah, fine. You win. You admitted it rather quickly. I thought you'd deny it more. Being with you, Michael, was just a game for me." "What do you mean? I was with you because you were Emily's husband, you know, coveting what someone else had. But my true love was another man. I was planning to leave you soon anyway." Stunned by her words, Michael was left without a response. I intended to enjoy this game until I got caught. Well, it doesn't matter whether or not I'm carrying his child. My right to the inheritance remains unchanged. You're still fixated on the inheritance? Unfortunately, you'll have to abandon that notion. What? How many times do I have to say it? I never divorced your father, so I have a right to the inheritance. That's what I've been trying to tell you. There's no such right because you and Dad were divorced long ago. That can't be. Maybe you've forgotten because of your age, but Dad had the divorce papers you already filled out. When I reported my mother's affair to my father, he revealed a completed divorce form. Apparently, he had kept it without filing it because of me. But before he passed away, he used that form to divorce my mother. So Linda, you won't get a single penny of Dad's estate. Do you understand now? That can't be. At my words, my mother, who had been smug until then, turned pale. Michael continued glaring at her. I'm going home. Realizing her affair was exposed and that she would not receive any inheritance, my mother fled as if running away. Later, my mother did give birth to a boy, but it was clear without even needing a DNA test that he was not Michael's child. I never thought you'd be such a jerk. He abandoned my mother, who failed to secure any inheritance, and disappeared. The man who was my mother's main affair partner also ran away upon learning of her pregnancy, as their relationship was apparently just a casual fling for him. In the end, my mother became a single mother at 40, left to raise a young child on her own without anyone to rely on. She is raising her son on welfare. The care of a small boy at her old age is physically demanding, and she has aged significantly. I once saw my mother with her son from a distance. With increased gray hair, she looked more like a grandmother than a mother. Meanwhile, I gave birth to a healthy girl, and now our family of 3 lives happily. Ironically, the child my mother gave birth to is my half-brother, and he will be in the same grade as my daughter, making our family situation quite complicated. On the anniversary of my father's death, we planned to visit his grave as a family of 3. The betrayal by my ex-husband and mother was painful, but it led me to gain an irreplaceable family. Surely he's watching over us from heaven, right? My Father in heaven. He must also be delighted with the birth of his granddaughter. With the love he gave us in our hearts, we vowed to continue walking closely as a family. Are you the reserved guest I was expecting? I have something important to discuss with you. Would you mind sparing a moment? As I was about to enter the restaurant, a woman in a chef's attire, wearing a tense expression, approached me. Intrigued, I wondered what she wanted to confirm regarding my meal. However, when I listened to her, I was hit with a shocking revelation that made me go pale. My name is Emily Thompson, 31 years old, working in the advertising industry. I work diligently to create better advertisements, and although it's a challenging job, it's incredibly rewarding. My husband, John, whom I met through work, is a year older than me, and we've been married for a year. Being a dual-income household, we efficiently share our household chores and help each other manage our lives. Initially, our interactions were solely work-related, but as time went by, we started having more personal conversations and grew closer. I realized that we shared similar interests and values, and I started developing feelings for him. Fearing that we might not see each other often after our collaborative project was coming to an end, I mustered the courage and confessed my feelings to him. Despite my nervousness, he accepted my feelings, and we started dating. After a year, he proposed, and we got married. Before marriage, John revealed that he had been previously married and was divorced. They were married for about a year, had no children, and mutually decided to part ways due to differing values. It seemed like John regretted not being able to make his previous marriage work. He appeared a bit reserved when it came to love, probably because of his past experience, but I understood. As long as there were no lingering issues, I didn't mind his past. It wasn't about wanting happiness for marriage, but wanting to live my life alongside John. So I accepted the fact that John was divorced and went ahead with the wedding. Our married life was filled with happiness, but slowly, the real implications of John being divorced began to unravel. After our wedding, we moved to an apartment close to both our workplaces, and John's parents live nearby, and we get along well. Our married life has been smoother than I anticipated. Initially, I had concerns about living so close to my in-laws, fearing potential conflicts, but they were always kind to me. Given our work schedules, John and I hardly have time during the weekdays, but we make the most of our weekends. Living with my husband, due to both of us working, we don't get much leisure time together on weekdays, except for brief conversations at dinner. Therefore, we spend a lot of time together on weekends. We both enjoy eating and often cook dishes we want to try at home. Ideally, dining out would be great. But I have an allergy to fruits from the Rosaceae family, so I can't casually eat out. Even when I think a dish doesn't contain these fruits, they might be used as a hidden ingredient, making it tedious to constantly check with restaurants. Even a slight touch causes my skin to turn red and swell. I feel bad asking about ingredients at restaurants and have developed an aversion to dining out due to this. I developed this allergy as an adult, and initially, I was taken aback since I hadn't expected it. I recall a time when I ate a lot of strawberries, and my mouth swelled up, making it difficult to breathe. I used to eat fruits frequently, and after getting tested at the hospital, I was devastated to find out about my Rosaceae fruit allergy. Discovering that I could no longer eat favorites like strawberries, apples, pears, and peaches saddened me. I'd had reactions after eating food I thought was safe, only to find out they contained allergens, which further discouraged me from dining out. This made me apprehensive about buying ready-made meals or snacks, adding a bit of stress to my life. Perhaps due to the initial severe allergic reaction and the sadness of not being able to eat my favorite fruits, I became overly cautious about checking ingredients during meals with my husband. While we were dating, my constant checks made me feel apologetic. However, I can't feel at ease without thorough confirmation, and without it, I can't fully enjoy meals. Still, we love eating. My husband and I would select ingredients and enjoy cooking together, a routine that helped reduce my excessive worries. Fortunately, both my husband and his parents understood my allergies, easing the mental burden I felt after getting married. Especially my mother-in-law, who had a deep understanding of allergies due to her father's severe wheat allergy. Wheat is commonly used in many products, and even a little bit affected him. Allergies can be lethal, so we were very careful. She explained that she researched my allergy and always ensured that meals were safe for me when we dined at her place or went out. She took extra precautions, allowing me to enjoy meals without worries. "You shouldn't have to be scared during meals. I'll make sure everything is safe for you," she told me, which almost moved me to tears. I have a great relationship with my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, who treats me like her own daughter. We'd often go out together, and my husband and his parents are wonderful people. The concerns I initially had about my allergies have vanished. One day, a project I proposed at work was successful, earning me a promotion, which I excitedly shared with my family. They were all thrilled, especially my mother-in-law. While spending time with her, she invited me to celebrate at an upscale restaurant. "That's a very fancy place, isn't it?" "I can't let you do that," I hesitated. The restaurant was in a luxurious hotel nearby, which I had always dreamt of visiting since my student days. However, it was truly upscale, and I felt it was too extravagant even for a celebration. "You don't have to hold back. This is such a joyous occasion. Let me treat you," she insisted, genuinely happy about my promotion. Her sentiment warmed my heart, but I had reservations. I remembered visiting the restaurant's website before my allergy developed and dreaming of tasting their fruit-filled tart someday. The restaurant often uses fruits from the Rosaceae family. While I appreciate my mother-in-law's kindness, besides the issue of the restaurant being upscale, I'm hesitant because they frequently use fruits from the Rosaceae family, to which I'm allergic. Whenever I dined out with my mother-in-law in the past, we informed the restaurant of my allergy beforehand. But each time, I felt guilty asking them to accommodate my dietary restrictions. So, we often chose restaurants that seldom use my allergenic foods. I worry that even if we inform this restaurant about my allergy, it might inconvenience them due to their frequent use of fruits. Of course, dishes without these fruits are safe for me, and I'm tempted to try them. However, considering the kitchen likely processes these fruits as well, the risk scares me. In the end, I decided to decline the offer because of my concerns about an allergic reaction. Still, my mother-in-law was keen on the idea. I'll inform them about the allergy when I make the reservation. Don't worry. I also have a connection there, so they'll take good care of us. I was surprised to hear that she had connection to the restaurant, given that neither she nor my husband had ever mentioned it. However, I assumed it wasn't something she boasted about. Considering my mother-in-law's enthusiasm and my genuine interest in the restaurant's cuisine, we decided to have lunch there together. Given that it was a suggestion from my mother-in-law, who had always been considerate of my allergies, I felt relieved, thinking there was nothing for me to worry about. When I told my husband about this, he was surprised to hear that his mother had connections at the restaurant. He'd also mentioned that the restaurant sometimes serves fruit, and he appreciated their consideration for allergies. When I shared with my husband that my mother-in-law had informed the restaurant about my allergies during the reservation, and that they would take precautions, he seemed relieved. It's a celebration of your promotion, right? Make sure to enjoy yourself, he said with a laugh. Initially, I declined because of my allergies, but I had always admired the restaurant, so I was excited about dining there on the day I had been eagerly waiting for. Since it was a weekday, I took a half day off after finishing my morning work. I planned to head straight to the restaurant. Being a high-end place, I chose a more formal outfit than usual and paid extra attention to my appearance. When going to work, colleagues noticed my attire and asked about my plans. When I told them about the meal, they wished me a good time before I left the office excitedly. As I entered the hotel entrance, my mother-in-law was already there. The two of us headed to the restaurant on the first floor, and since we had a reservation, we were immediately escorted to our table. Our reservation was for 1:00 p.m., but due to the busy lunchtime, we were informed that the serving might be a bit delayed. Understanding the popularity of the high-end restaurant, I decided to order just drinks for the time being and wait patiently. Having already finished work and being encouraged by my mother-in-law, I ordered champagne. We enjoyed our conversation while waiting for our meal. Though I've had champagne before, the one I had that day tasted the best. Feeling the effects of the alcohol and the anticipation of dining at a restaurant I had longed for, I was in high spirits. From the dishes at the neighboring tables, I could tell the food looked delicious, and I eagerly awaited our meal. Suddenly, my phone rang from inside my bag. Realizing I hadn't turned it off during my meal with my mother-in-law, I tried to shut it off. Seeing the incoming call was from work, I sobered up immediately, worried that there might be a problem. I excused myself from my mother-in-law and stepped out of the restaurant to take the call, ensuring no one was around in case of sensitive information. The call was regarding a document I had submitted earlier that day. My colleague urgently needed clarification. Relieved that it wasn't because of an error on my part, I answered their questions and wrapped up the call in about 5 minutes. As I was about to turn off my phone to go back and enjoy my meal, an unfamiliar woman approached me. "Excuse me, you're the customer who made a reservation for today's meal at the restaurant, right?" The woman was dressed as a chef, presumably from the restaurant's kitchen. She looked rushed and a bit out of breath with a concerned expression. I wondered why she would come out during such a busy time. I was puzzled, but when she said she needed to confirm something, I answered her questions. Her face went pale, and she urgently told me to leave the hotel immediately. "It's dangerous to go back to the restaurant now. Please leave the hotel and ensure your safety immediately." Suspicious of the woman's intense demeanor, I asked for clarification. Once I grasped the situation, I felt the blood drain from my face. I quickly hopped into a taxi waiting in front of the hotel and headed home. That evening, my mother-in-law called. When I picked up, she was furious about me leaving her at the hotel and returning home without saying anything, causing embarrassment. Since she had reserved a special course, you had everything set up to celebrate, and you just leave without a word. Don't you know basic manners? What kind of upbringing did you have? She was angry in a way I had never seen from my mother-in-law before, and she started to berate me. I had always thought of my mother-in-law as a kind and gentle person, but there was no trace of that now. I believed that the kind mother-in-law I had known would be upset if I left without saying anything, but would also be concerned about whether something had happened to me. However, she was furiously yelling with such intensity that I began to believe the rumors about her were true. As I remained silent, she continued to berate me further, complaining even about my parents and how they raised me. You've been silent this whole time. Don't you realize you've done something wrong? You're not fit to be my son's wife. After a long tirade, she finally seemed to calm down a bit. I then quietly posed a question to her. You told me that you informed the restaurant about my allergies when you made the reservation today, and I could relax, right? But the restaurant wasn't aware of my allergies. So what happened? In fact, the meal today had ingredients that I was allergic to, not only in the dessert but also in the main courses. The allergenic ingredients were used in marinades and sauces, which weren't apparent from just looking. The woman who approached me earlier had taken the reservation call from my mother-in-law, and she said that no mention of my allergies had been made. However, she noticed the allergy badge on my bag and came to check just in case. Being the chef responsible for our meal that day, she immediately noticed the inclusion of the allergenic ingredients. If she hadn't informed me, I would have unknowingly consumed the food with allergens, which would have resulted in a severe allergic reaction. Initially, I doubted that my mother-in-law would purposely make me consume allergens, but considering the woman took time out of her busy schedule to inform me, I quickly believed her. Furthermore, this woman knew about my mother-in-law's true nature, and she deduced my situation, advising me to leave immediately and ensure I went somewhere my mother-in-law would follow. The reason she knew my mother-in-law was that she was my husband's ex-wife, now working under her maiden name, Kate Young. Seeing me with my mother-in-law, she realized I was the new wife and decided to help me out. She assumed I was the new wife because she believed that my mother-in-law wouldn't have female friends, especially someone of a similar age, after getting married to my husband. The ex-wife lived with his parents and was subjected to significant mistreatment by my mother-in-law before they married. She, like me, thought the mother-in-law was gentle and kind, which left her quite baffled once they started living together. When my husband or father-in-law wasn't around, the ex-wife faced continuous criticism for her housework and was always subjected to snide remarks. Being a full-time housewife, she had no escape despite her culinary skills, honed from attending a professional cooking school. The mother-in-law still found faults with her dishes, even discarding them at times. She considered discussing this with her husband. But the mother-in-law was adept at concealing her true nature, especially around him. Feeling her complaints would fall on deaf ears, the ex-wife aimed to gather evidence. However, as she had recently become a full-time housewife, she lacked funds and was almost constantly under the watchful eye of the mother-in-law. Unable to gather proof and without anyone to confide in, she felt trapped in this life, so she fled in the form of a divorce. Despite never having worked before, she utilized her culinary license to seek employment and was lucky to land a job at the restaurant. She worked diligently, and over time, the memories of her mistreatment faded, and she began to enjoy her work. After a few years, as she matured into a full-fledged chef, for some reason, my mother-in-law discovered she worked there and started frequenting the restaurant. Upon realizing her ex-daughter-in-law was there, she discreetly threatened her for discounts while she declined absurd demands. Past traumas influenced her to yield to some, and the connection my mother-in-law spoke of referred to the ex-wife. When I questioned why she hadn't communicated my allergies to the restaurant, My mother-in-law feigned ignorance. I knew about your allergies, so I must have told them. Maybe it's the staff's oversight. She countered defensively, placing the blame on the restaurant staff. Given that the reservation call was handled by the ex-wife, it's probable that my mother-in-law deliberately didn't mention the allergies, intending to pin the blame on the restaurant. However, I was already onto her game, considering the restaurant's stringent guidelines on allergies. If informed, they'd have accommodated my dietary needs. Moreover, they record calls for dispute resolutions, so it would be easy to verify who was at fault. When confronted with this, my mother-in-law, not anticipating recorded evidence, fell silent. I pressed on. You've always been cautious about my allergies. Why did you not mention them this time? Until now, my mother-in-law was well aware of the dangers of allergies and always showed concern, so I never imagined she'd do something like this. She knew that by doing this, it wouldn't end well for me, given that we had a good relationship until now. I was curious why she acted this way and sought an explanation. After a brief silence, she shouted defiantly, "I despise you. You outshine me. You deserve some pain." She was envious since I received praise at work and was more liked in the neighborhood than her. She arrogantly claimed that even if I spoke out, no one would believe me. If it weren't for this incident, I wouldn't have believed she was capable of such actions. Thus, I had collected evidence to reveal her true nature and confronted her with it. Everyone would believe me. My parents and my husband, John, are here, listening to everything. Plus, this conversation is being recorded. Everyone present had heard her berate me and her intentions to purposely expose me to allergens. In fact, after leaving the restaurant, I immediately went to my parents' house and had John join us. I had informed them of the situation, and we were discussing our next steps when she called. So I swiftly switched the call to speaker and started recording it for evidence. As a result, we had her incriminating statements on tape. She was taken aback by my revelation and asked in a shaky voice, "Wait, is John there with you?" She never expected her son to find out and asked in a trembling voice. In response, her son, who had been silent and emotionless, gathering evidence, spoke up. "I heard everything. I can't believe you do something like this, Mom," he said in a suppressed, angry tone. She hastily began making excuses. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean." Her desperate attempt seemed insincere, especially after her earlier outburst. His anger was evident as he shouted, not only towards Kate, but also towards Emily. "I don't even want to think of you as my mother anymore. We're cutting ties." Given the true nature of the mother he had trusted, John was beyond furious. He then declared his estrangement from her, ignoring her cries. Furthermore, my parents said that they would sue her for attempted murder, and John cut off the call, disregarding her voice. Later, when John informed his father about the incident, he was furious and suggested divorce, eventually throwing her out of the house. With no relatives to rely on, no income, and being a housewife, she clung desperately, pleading and crying. Her husband, feeling a final bit of pity, put her in a basic apartment, paid the first month's rent, and told her to find work so she could support herself. But having been a housewife, she seemed to lack the drive to work, and, for some reason, clung to both John and me. She barged into our house demanding money, but we drove her away, telling her to earn it herself, especially John, who was extremely stern, ensuring she wouldn't approach our house again. Later on, rumors suggested she started working at a nearby supermarket, but she seemed quite disheveled. Given her nasty attitude, she had no one to rely on and seemed to be struggling on her own. I hope she continues to work hard, both for her own expenses and to pay us the compensation. And I want her to stay out of our lives. As for why she did what she did, it seems she was jealous of me and wanted to see me suffer. John's ex-wife had moved in after graduating from a vocational school and became a housewife. She was submissive, obeyed her mother-in-law, and had a quiet nature due to her unpleasant character, which made her disliked by women and her enjoyment in bullying those weaker than herself. She used to take out her stress on John's ex-wife. However, I am independent, working, and getting promotions. I had a higher social status than her and was well regarded in our neighborhood. Initially, she liked me, thinking I was a competent daughter-in-law, but she gradually grew jealous. Being unable to bully me, she wished I'd be in a position where I'd become incompetent, wanting to look down on me. After the explosive call when John and his father confronted her, she confessed everything, leading to their declaration of cutting ties with her. Later, John apologized to his ex-wife for not noticing the bullying. At that time, he was new at his job and deeply trusted his mother, which blinded him to her behavior. Still, he felt he should have noticed and was regretful. His ex-wife assured him she was over it. She's dating someone now, and their conversation ended on a peaceful note. John felt relieved, knowing she was genuinely happy. Thanks to her help, I became friends with John's ex-wife. She's also career-oriented, and we get along well. Although she's his ex-wife, there's nothing concerning regarding their relationship, and I'm glad to have a friend close in age. After settling matters with the mother-in-law, John and his father threw me a promotion party. With the celebration from the two of them, I felt happy and determined to continue working hard without worrying about my mother-in-law. I was taken aback by the unexpected news that Thomas, my friend, sold the house I inherited from my dad for $450,000. The revelation came with an oddly cheerful tone as he shared it over the phone from the hospital. To add to the surprise, he boldly announced that he's planning to embark on a trip with his mistress. The whole situation struck me as sheer madness, leaving me bewildered. I couldn't fathom why Thomas would sell the house with sentimental value and make such an announcement. The news about abandoning his family, including his daughter Elizabeth, was particularly shocking. Thomas expressed a nonchalant attitude towards leaving Elizabeth behind, stating that she had been getting on his nerves and acting high and mighty. His callous remarks about his own child enraged me. As I processed the shocking news of Thomas selling the house and abandoning his family for his mistress, a mix of anger and shock overwhelmed me. It felt like I might lose my mind. I felt a strong urge to intervene and prevent Thomas from hastily disposing of the house. My name is Lisa Johnson, a 37.5-year-old homemaker. Life with my husband Thomas and our 8-year-old daughter Elizabeth has been far from harmonious. Marital discord has been escalating for a while, with suspicions of Thomas's infidelity lingering for about a year. Despite lacking concrete proof, his behavior, such as frequenting bars after work, returning with a peculiar sense, and gifting expensive items not meant for me, raised concerns. I've been too afraid to confront him about his potential affair, unable to take any decisive action. Reflecting on our relationship, I recall the Thomas I fell in love with a decade ago. His kindness and sincerity initially drew me in, and our marriage seemed blissful. However, things took a turn for the worse around the time our daughter Elizabeth turned 1. Parenting became more challenging, and as a full-time homemaker, I sought Thomas's assistance with tasks like baths and meals. Yet his behavior and frequent outings began to change, leaving me bewildered about how our once happy marriage ended up in this tumultuous state. In the beginning, Thomas, perhaps aware of his role as a father, initially assisted with childcare as I requested. However, as it became a daily routine, he gradually developed resentment and stopped actively participating in parenting. He started expressing sentiments like, "This is your job as a stay-at-home mom. You should handle parenting on your own. What does a tired man like me have to help out after work?" Thomas's complaints were intense, leaving me and Elizabeth alone in the living room while he retreated to the bedroom. Dealing with Elizabeth's tantrums and struggling through the evening routine alone, Thomas's harsh words lingered painfully. His withdrawal from interacting with Elizabeth became more pronounced, even on his days off. When Elizabeth asked him to play, he responded dismissively, saying, "Playing is your mom's job. I'm busy." Thomas didn't consider Elizabeth's feelings, scolding her if she cried and blaming my parenting skills. To shield Elizabeth from his verbal abuse, we often retreated to our room and played together, just the two of us. There were times when I yearned for personal hobbies like reading or watching movies. However, living with Elizabeth around the clock left little time for myself, while Thomas indulged in his horse racing hobby. The situation felt unfair, but I couldn't complain as our household relied on Thomas's income. I felt a sense of helplessness and frustration as I found myself unable to change the circumstances that had persisted for 8 long years. Thomas's disinterest in parenting and his abusive language became a distressing pattern, a far cry from the caring and kind Thomas I knew before our marriage. Despite enduring this situation, I knew it was essential to provide for Elizabeth, and Thomas's income was crucial for our survival. One day, while drawing together, Elizabeth complimented my artistic skills and suggested that I pursue drawing as a job. Despite Thomas's contemptuous nature, Elizabeth had grown up to be honest, straightforward, and cheerful, the opposite of my more introverted personality. It was heartening to see her thriving at school, surrounded by friends, and even earning the favor of her teacher. Elizabeth's compliments about my drawings filled me with pride and confidence, reminding me that she paid attention to me and appreciated my efforts. I was grateful for her positivity, which brought joy to our challenging family dynamics. As long as Elizabeth could smile, I felt a sense of resilience in facing the challenges of our life. That quiet realization echoed in my thoughts that night. However, our household situation took a familiar turn when Thomas, in his usual inebriated state, stumbled home and collapsed into the living room. His drinking habits had escalated lately, becoming a source of increasing concern. Sighing, I began the routine of peeling his jacket off his slumped body. In the process, a piece of paper fell from a pocket that typically housed only keys. Upon closer scrutiny, it revealed itself as a receipt from a motel. Unmistakable evidence confirming the suspicions I had only held vaguely until then. In an attempt to conceal the turmoil within me, I quietly stashed the receipt away on a shelf as the night unfolded. I contemplated how to address this revelation with Thomas. The next morning, with Thomas not yet fully sober, he left the house after Elizabeth had gone to school. Engrossed in my regular household tasks, I found it impossible to shake off the lingering thoughts of the previous day's revelation. Having suspected Thomas's infidelity without concrete evidence, the receipt presented a dilemma. It became challenging to ignore the truth and maintain the facade of a masked couple. I felt compelled to confront him, seek an admission, and perhaps an apology within the upcoming week or even days. Lost in contemplation, my smartphone interrupted my thoughts with an unexpected vibration. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen, triggering a sense of apprehension as I answered the call. The caller identified themselves as someone from General Hospital delivering news about Thomas. He had been rushed to the hospital by ambulance and was undergoing surgery for a kidney disease. The doctor explained that Thomas's kidneys were likely to fail, necessitating a transplant. Overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events, the doctor asked if I was all right. Despite the complex emotions, I found myself agreeing. As the doctor elaborated on the details of the transplant surgery, my mind swirled with confusion. Although Thomas had often mocked me and been unfaithful, I didn't wish for him to lose his life. That night, I held onto the hope for Thomas's recovery. My thoughts centered around his impending transplant surgery. As weeks passed, news about potential kidney transplant candidates within the family emerged. Surprisingly, I turned out to be the best match. The revelation that I was a compatible donor for Thomas, despite the challenges in our relationship, presented an unexpected twist in our story. The situation became more complex with the presence of Thomas's parents, who were still alive. The impending decision about organ donation required careful consideration, blending the threads of our troubled history with the possibility of a renewed connection through the transplant process. Despite my own less than perfect health, I emerged as the most suitable donor for Thomas's kidney transplant due to our matching blood types and the fact that he was an only child. Admittedly, I had reservations about undergoing the surgery, but the prospect of preserving Thomas's life overshadowed any hesitations. Recognizing the irreplaceable value of Thomas's existence, I made the difficult decision to be his kidney donor. When I shared Thomas's medical condition and our upcoming transplant surgery with Elizabeth, she responded with understanding and encouragement, sending me off with her blessing. Elizabeth stayed with my in-laws during my hospitalization, and despite their own health challenges, they were able to care for Elizabeth, who happily stayed with them, sharing a close bond with her grandparents. This arrangement provided me with a sense of relief, knowing that Elizabeth was in good hands. With that reassurance, I faced the kidney transplant surgery a week later. After completing the necessary health checks and signing consent forms, I donated my kidney to Thomas. The surgery, to my surprise, concluded more swiftly than anticipated. I spent approximately a week in the hospital, while Thomas's recovery extended to 10 days. Fortunately, there were no complications, and the recovery process proceeded smoothly. Just before my scheduled discharge, I received an unexpected call that sent a shiver down my spine. Answering the phone, I was met with Thomas's voice, the recipient of my kidney. Expecting words of gratitude for the life-saving donation, I inquired about his well-being after the surgery. However, Thomas' response took an unforeseen turn as he shifted the conversation to our house. In an inappropriately cheerful tone, he disclosed that he had sold our house for $450,000 and intended to embark on a trip with his mistress. The news struck me like a bolt of lightning, and I couldn't comprehend the audacity of his actions. The house, a precious inheritance from my father, was being callously disposed of, and Thomas's brazen declaration of having a mistress added another layer of shock in the midst of my disbelief. I confronted him about Elizabeth's well-being, only to be met with indifference. Thomas callously dismissed any concerns for our daughter, stating that he didn't care and was leaving her behind. The revelation left me enraged and appalled. The thought of him selling the house and abandoning his own daughter was beyond comprehension. Determined to intervene, I realized that I needed to stop Thomas from hastily relinquishing the house. As the call abruptly ended, my mind swirled with turmoil. I was left grappling with the shocking news of Thomas's actions and contemplating how to prevent him from following through with his impulsive decisions. The urgency to protect our home and Elizabeth's well-being became a pressing matter that demanded immediate attention. Trying to comprehend the sudden upheaval caused by Thomas's actions, I found myself unable to believe that he had sold our house, especially while he was in the hospital. The shock of this revelation worsened my condition, leading to an extension of my hospital stay. Feeling helpless and distressed, I spent days on the hospital bed contemplating the next steps. My first instinct was to call Elizabeth. Without the house, we would have nowhere to go. Despite my anger towards Thomas's bold declaration about his mistress, my primary concern was Elizabeth's well-being. Calling my in-laws home, Elizabeth answered the phone, and I anxiously questioned her about how she was doing and whether she felt lonely. I also mentioned the news about our house being sold by Dad. Elizabeth's response was unexpectedly reassuring. She calmly assured me that she had taken care of things. Intrigued and puzzled by her words, I listened as she explained that Dad had told her he asked his mistress to sell the house. Elizabeth had navigated through this unexpected turn of events, leaving me surprised and proud of her maturity. She reassured me that everything was fine, expressing gratitude for my concern. Encouraged by Elizabeth's composure, I allowed a bit of peace to settle in. However, curiosity lingered about what was happening with Thomas and his mistress at that very moment. Reminding myself of the importance of rest, I allowed sleep to claim me. After 3 days of recovery, I was discharged from the hospital and headed to my in-laws' house. Elizabeth greeted me with joy, and my mother-in-law smiled gently, expressing happiness at my return. However, my father-in-law wore a grim expression, apologizing for Thomas's actions. I couldn't fathom how Thomas had strayed so far from the values of his wonderful parents. Despite the apology, I took some responsibility, acknowledging that perhaps I should have spoken up sooner. As the conversation progressed, my in-laws revealed that they wouldn't let Thomas have his way. Intrigued and somewhat anxious, Elizabeth and I attempted to head home. On our way, though, we encountered an unexpected scene in front of a realtor's office. There, we witnessed a familiar yet disheveled Thomas and an unknown woman, presumably his mistress, engaged in a heated argument. Dressed in sweatpants with unkempt hair, Thomas was visibly distressed, while the mistress, wearing a short skirt with a single high heel and a bare face, expressed frustration about the house not being sold and the canceled purchase of $450,000. The chaotic scene unfolded before us, adding another layer of complexity to an already tumultuous situation. Thomas's enraged stomping and his mistress's screeching drew shocked looks from passersby. Elizabeth and I, equally surprised, approached them, seeking an explanation. Upon questioning Thomas about his actions, he and his mistress were visibly taken aback, gasping in surprise. Accusations were immediately thrown our way, with Thomas suggesting that I must have talked the buyer out of the deal. Dismissing their baseless claims and instinctively shielding Elizabeth behind me, I faced their accusations. The realtor, confused by the unfolding drama, reacted with disbelief upon learning that I was Thomas's wife. The cancellation of the house purchase had disrupted their plans, and Thomas, pointing at his mistress, claimed to still have debts from the money he spent on her. It slowly dawned on me that Thomas' intention was to sell the house to settle debts incurred for his mistress and secure a new place for both of them. The realization hit me like a wave. Thomas was fully aware that the house was a precious inheritance from my father. To think he would disregard Elizabeth and me, attempting to seize my most valuable asset, was beyond belief. Anger welled up within me as I confronted Thomas. Despite the critical situation, he continued to hurl insults, displaying a complete lack of decency. I pointed out the audacity of him trying to sell my house without discussion, emphasizing that I was the rightful owner. My anger intensified as I questioned whether he had forged documents to proceed with the sale. Furthermore, I revealed a surprising twist. Thomas had been bad-mouthing the supposed buyers of the house, unaware that they were his own parents. The revelation about my in-laws' involvement came from Elizabeth, who had spoken to them about Thomas's misdeeds. Infuriated by their son's actions, my in-laws decided to intervene to protect both Lisa and their good-hearted granddaughter Elizabeth. Elizabeth stepped forward confidently, explaining that her grandparents were well aware of the house's significance to me and disapproved of its easy sale. In a strategic move, they had pretended to buy the house before anyone else could. Thomas, desperate and defeated, unleashed a vulgar laugh and lashed out at Elizabeth and her grandparents. However, Elizabeth remained unfazed by his verbal assault, and in response, I retrieved a piece of paper from my bag and thrust it under Thomas's nose, ready to confront him with undeniable evidence. The unfolding drama showcased the complexities of family dynamics and the lengths one would go to protect the ones they love. Brandishing the divorce papers, I confronted Thomas with a resolute declaration, I want a divorce. However, instead of acknowledging the gravity of the situation, Thomas snorted and scoffed, questioning my ability to live without him. Unfazed by his arrogance, I decided it was time to dispel his misguided assumptions. Determined to shatter Thomas's illusions, I calmly informed him that I had a plan. You needn't worry. I'm going to receive a lifetime gift from your parents, I declared. The mention of a lifetime gift left Thomas and his mistress bewildered. I went on to explain that my in-laws, recognizing their declining health, wished to give me a portion of their assets before it was too late. Initially, I suggested that such a gift should go to Thomas. However, my in-laws insisted that I, as the one who had given them a lovely granddaughter, were more important to them than a son who couldn't even express gratitude for a life-saving organ donation. Grateful for their generosity, I accepted the lifetime gift, leaving Thomas pale and agitated. Outraged by the turn of events, Thomas protested, calling it dirty and unjust. He threatened to take the matter to court, but I calmly reminded him that it was his fault for spending all that money, and his parents had made a justified decision. Dismissing his threats, I questioned whether he even had the financial means to go to court, highlighting the consequences of his past betrayals. Closing the distance to Thomas and delivering the final blow, I made it clear that every penny of compensation for emotional distress and child support would be sought. Unleashing a stern warning, I stated that if he couldn't pay, I would chase him to the ends of the earth to collect. Thomas, desperate and shaken, begged for forgiveness, but it was too late. Glaring at him with unwavering determination, I declared that I would pursue every avenue to hold him accountable for insulting Elizabeth and me. As Thomas and his mistress screamed and ran away, the realtor who had witnessed the entire confrontation expressed gratitude for the resolution. Acknowledging the awkwardness of the situation, I apologized for any trouble caused, ready to move forward with the next chapter of my life. Taking Elizabeth's hand, we headed home, and she expressed gratitude for standing up for her. A smile adorned Elizabeth's face, and in that moment, I made a silent vow to protect her for the rest of our lives. The divorce from Thomas unfolded without any significant issues, marking the end of a long-suffering marriage. Surprisingly, it was almost anticlimactic, prompting me to reflect on why I had endured everything until now. It became apparent that Thomas had invested a considerable amount of money into his affair and had resorted to borrowing funds from various sources. His mistress eventually left him, citing an inability to be with such a financially troubled man. Misfortunes seemed to converge for Thomas as his company had to cut back on staff due to a decrease in sales caused by material shortages. Working in the factory, Thomas was among the first to be laid off. While it may be inconvenient for him, it's challenging to believe he was laid off for no reason. It's likely that the company let go of those who underperformed or had poor conduct, which might have been the case for Thomas, given his demeanor at home. Now unemployed, he is scraping by with part-time jobs, lacking the energy to actively search for a new full-time position. His life seems bleak, having lost his job, lover, and wife. But there's little room for sympathy. Despite my efforts, including donating a part of my kidney to him, Thomas made a mockery of me. It appears that karma has caught up with him, and he should focus on working hard to pay off his debt. As for me, I've started doing illustration work, utilizing the assets I inherited from my in-laws. Initially inspired by Elizabeth's compliment about my drawing skills, I have received positive feedback from clients who appreciate the meticulous and skillful nature of my work. The plan is to increase my clientele and work diligently to provide a better life for Elizabeth. Thrown at me instead of a warm greeting during a family gathering just before my son's wedding was a remark that hit hard. In front of me, a baguette from an upscale French restaurant rested on a glass plate, a symbol of unexpected humiliation served by my son's fiancé. I had raised my son, Christopher, on my own, and never did I imagine such a moment of degradation. As a 55-year-old housewife named So, widowed early in life, I had dedicated myself to nurturing Christopher. This year, he turned 25, graduated from college, and secured a job, becoming the pride of my life. Despite his success, he chose to continue living with me in the house left by his late father. I cherished the idea of spending more time with him. However, my world took an unexpected turn when Christopher revealed he had a girlfriend and intended to marry her. Initially shocked, I soon embraced the news with genuine joy, expressing my happiness at his growth. Christopher, still living with me, promised to bring her home soon, but the opportunity didn't materialize. Curiosity and anticipation built up in me. And when I finally asked about her, Christopher shared some details. Her name was Roy, 4 years older than him, and she worked as a tutor from a family of teachers. The revelation surprised me, and I wondered about their relationship, but I patiently waited to meet her. Time passed, and 2 months went by without a meeting. The absence of Roy started feeling intentional. Fate intervened when, by chance, I overheard a conversation during lunch. Seated back to back with a woman, she complained loudly about her upcoming family meeting before the wedding. Intrigued, I listened as she expressed a deliberate intention to delay meeting the family, wanting to test Christopher's commitment to their relationship and prove he was not a mama's boy. The unexpected encounter left me contemplating the dynamics at play, realizing that fate could be both intriguing and frightening. She said it, and I nearly turned around. Christopher's name echoed in the air, causing a slight dizziness. Her friend's advice to Roy, "You need to be more humble," confirmed the woman loudly discussing her future mother-in-law was none other than Christopher's fiancée. Holding my coffee cup, my hand trembled, and my friend, sensing my distress, asked if I was okay. I mechanically ate the recommended dessert, my mind fixated on escaping that place as quickly as possible. Unaware of my presence, Roy continued her complaints about her fiancé's family. She belittled the concept of a single mother family, comparing it to her supposedly superior educational background. Roy labeled me a clinging mother and spoke about making Christopher abandon me after the wedding. Fear overwhelmed any anger I felt. The conflict between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law had begun prematurely. Even before the family meeting before the wedding, Roy showcased her disdain. Yet, she was the woman Christopher chose. I tried to reassure myself that there must be something wonderful about her. Back home, I attempted to calm my nerves, resolving not to tell Christopher about this incident. Alone, I stopped pushing him about the family meeting. I knew she had no intention of attending, and I refused to continuously be looked down upon by being too accommodating. Christopher sensed my change of heart, but didn't press further. "It's okay if you're busy, whenever it's convenient for you," I told him, trying to ease his burden. The wedding plans between Christopher and Roy seemed to progress faster than the family meeting. Spotting a wedding venue brochure on the living room table, I realized the countdown had begun. I contemplated speaking up about the wrong order of things, but refrained for my son's sake. Making a fuss would lead to accusations of being unable to let go or being a mama's boy. Faceless accusations that would upset me. Christopher was crucial to me, but he was an independent adult. I had refrained from interfering more than necessary, demonstrating my tolerance. One morning, Christopher abruptly announced a family meeting with the parents-in-law. They had reserved a fancy French restaurant, and he wanted me to come. The meeting was scheduled in 2 days, a sudden announcement that left me a bit irritated. Shouldn't such things be planned after matching everyone's schedules? I held back my frustration, saying, "All right, I haven't formally met Roy yet, so it's good to meet her sooner." Christopher apologized for the sudden plan, but in my mind, it was Roy and her family who should be apologizing, not him. I reassured him that it's fine. On the day of the family meeting, Christopher and I arrived at the designated upscale French restaurant. I felt a bit nervous, it being my first time at such a fancy place. Christopher chuckled, acknowledging the nerve-wracking atmosphere. As we gave our name to the staff, we were guided to a private room where Roy's family had already gathered. Roy and her mother, Mara, were present. Excusing ourselves, I'd opened the door to the private room. Seated there were Mara, exuding a definite teacher vibe, and Roy, sporting slightly flashy makeup. Her dress seemed mismatched, likely chosen by Mara for the occasion. Roy and Mara remained silent until I finished my greetings, their scrutiny palpable as if evaluating me as a lesser presence. Christopher, familiar with Mara, greeted her with "long time no see." Mara chuckled, mentioning she had been looking forward to meeting the famous mother, a slight sting in her mention of single mother. Suppressing any reaction, I played it down, emphasizing Christopher's inexperience and suggesting they take care of him. Mara, contentedly nodding, maintain an air of superiority. Her demeanor hinted at how she might treat her students and their parents, an attitude I wouldn't desire for my child. She invited me to sit, yet Roy hadn't greeted me. With reluctance, I initiated conversation, prompting Roy to respond with a mocking snort, deeming repetition inefficient. Her arrogant remarks stirred anger within me, but I restrained my temper. She was the woman Christopher had chosen. I feigned calmness, acknowledging her comment with forced civility, though I felt close to my limit. Mara informed us that Roy's father would be late due to work, suggesting we proceed without him. Roy then made a seemingly innocent comment to Christopher, insinuating his lack of exposure to such lavish food due to his past poverty. Christopher, unfazed, went along with her comment. I always knew Christopher to be kind and patient, but this situation seemed beyond that. Concerns about how he navigated society started to creep in. Was he possibly being taken advantage of? A parental worry nagged at me. Ignoring the odd expressions from Roy and Mara, I suggested we enjoy the feast. However, their unpleasant smiles intensified, and the reason behind their mockery soon became apparent. As the first dish arrived on a beautifully decorated plate, I couldn't help but exclaim at the sight of a simple baguette on a glass plate. Roy and Mara seemed to find this hilariously amusing, laughing heartily at my shocked expression. It turned out that the owner of the upscale French restaurant was Mara's brother, and they had collaborated to ridicule me. "The poor that suits you best," Roy said, openly mocking me. Christopher, seemingly pale, and I were left in disbelief. Trying to contain my anger, I muttered about how this supposedly suited a poor person like me. Roy misinterpreted my reaction, thinking I was crying. Dismissing it, she laughed even harder. Surprisingly, Mara, who might be expected to scold Roy, only said, "Oh dear, Roy," without any intention of reprimanding her. I couldn't bear the idea of such individuals becoming part of my family. Just as I raised my bowed head, Roy's father entered, apologizing for being late. Witnessing the baguette situation, he seemed taken aback. Roy proudly explained that she had the baguette prepared, thinking I, raised in poverty, hadn't experienced such cuisine. Her father scolded her for taking the joke too far, but couldn't hide his amusement. The thought of them becoming my family was unbearable. As the father turned pale, I looked up and recognized him. Cedric, the principal of a private high school where I had been facing difficulties. I expressed my surprise, and he exclaimed in shock, revealing that he had become the principal 3 years ago. Instead of dwelling on educational policies, I couldn't resist suggesting he pay more attention to education at home, especially considering the insult from his daughter, something I vowed never to forget. I said, staring down at him. He had always berated me, claiming that a single mother couldn't be a principal. He had spread rumors that I couldn't properly educate my own child. Roy, realizing the impact of her actions, seemed taken aback. Marcia trembled, lost for words. I looked at each member of Roy's family and slowly bit into the baguette. The sound of meat crunching echoed in the room. Delicious, as expected of a high-end French restaurant's baguette. "How about it, Cedric?" I'd offered, smiling as I held out the glass plate with the baguette. His hand trembled amusingly as he took it. "Don't get the wrong idea. I'd always separate work and personal life. Your dismissal has always been a topic at the board meetings. I was the one opposing it. Without rivalry, there's no momentum for reform. But your role ends here," I declared, giving him a final warning. In fact, I had evidence of him accepting bribes during admissions, manipulating interviews, and enjoying a luxurious life with that money. I was still deciding whether to pursue criminal charges, but if he left the school quietly, I was willing to let it go. "Christopher, let's go home. She may be this kind of lady, but can you still see her as a marriage partner? I won't stop you if you choose her," I said to Christopher, whose gaze was fixed on the baguette Cedric held out to him. Roy, with a strange smile, whispered, "You'll marry me, right?" Thinking that marrying him was her only way to save Cedric's position, her pleading eyes turned to him. He looked down, gripping his hands on his knees. "The engagement is off. This marriage is as if it never happened," he declared. "It's just a joke. I didn't mean to mock you. It's a joke, Christopher." "You're so stiff." Roy desperately tried to cover up. If that wasn't mockery, then what was it? I was amazed that she couldn't come up with a better excuse. He looked at Roy with an unexpectedly cold gaze. "Roy, you've been given a lot by your parents, education, and love. But I believe I received even more from my mom. Seeing her work was cool. She's still cool," he declared. He could never forgive her for mocking me and expressed pity for the students she was teaching. "I wouldn't want to be taught by someone like her. I heard bad rumors about you but chose to believe otherwise. You betrayed that trust," he said, causing tears to stream down Roy's face. She seemed to finally understand the irreversible damage done. Wait. You're joking about the breakup, right? I bragged about getting married to my friends. I can't break it off. It's embarrassing," she pleaded tearfully. "What's most necessary for you now is to reflect on how things came to this. We probably won't see each other again, but I hope you grow," I said. As Christopher and I were about to leave the private room, Cedric grabbed his shoulder to stop him. Christopher shook off his hand as if it were something filthy. "I've been patient, but let me say this clearly. What's wrong with being raised by a single mother? Did you see Roy's vulgar behavior? Raised by respectable parents. You should be more ashamed," he said firmly. Cedric had no response and looked down in shame. Roy's cries echoed in the private room as we left the restaurant. The moment we stepped outside, we heard Cedric's angry voice, probably yelling at Roy. "Christopher, you need to be more discerning in choosing women." When I said that, he scratched his head and mumbled, "It's embarrassing." Apparently, Roy had aggressively pursued him, and Christopher, who tends to be easily swayed, fell into that situation. It was clear that Roy saw an opportunity in him. Regardless, I expressed relief that everything came to light before the marriage as we headed home. The engagement ended amicably. Roy initially demanded compensation, but Christopher dismissed it logically, explaining to his lawyer that Roy was entirely to blame for the broken engagement. The compensation demand was dropped, and when threatened with a lawsuit, Roy quickly backed down. Perhaps her parents advised her not to escalate the situation further. Though I usually keep work and personal life separate, Cedric had to leave the school due to the bribery issue during admissions becoming public. Faced with the choice of leaving quietly or going to court, he opted for the former. Unemployed and desperately seeking a new job, he faced the challenge of overcoming the bad rumors that spread fast in the industry. Roy, having resigned from her tutoring job, was reportedly confined to a room in her parents' house, too embarrassed to even seek new employment. Marcia, burdened with 2 unemployed adults, was allegedly preparing for divorce, yet she couldn't maintain her previous luxurious lifestyle. She wanted to use her earnings solely for herself, citing that as her reason for divorce. A logical decision, perhaps, but one that led to the family's downfall. While I feel a bit sorry for her, I believe it's her responsibility. Sometimes after the incident, I felt genuinely happy for the first time in a while. Christopher introduced me to a wonderful woman, a single mother working at the same place as him. She has a daughter about to turn 3, and it seems she was the one who lifted Christopher's spirits after the broken engagement with Roy. She is bright and sunny, and her daughter is fond of Christopher. Despite the roundabout journey, I am slightly relieved that Christopher seems to be on his way to building a happy family. Maybe despite the challenges, I'll even become a grandmother.
When a wife buys something, her husband thinks it belongs to him too. If he can't accept that, he suggests divorce. My husband Charles often tries to take things from me for no good reason. Once, he even wanted to give gifts I bought for my parents to his own family to make himself look good. When I confronted him about this, he looked shocked. Before I married Charles, my grandparents left me a valuable gift, a piece of property. They advised me to keep it a secret from Charles, even though he's my husband. They said I should keep quiet about having a source of income and enough money to live comfortably. I felt a bit sorry for Charles, but I chose to follow my grandparents' advice. After my grandfather, who had always taken care of me, passed away, I carried on with my life with Charles. Then, something happened. One day, when I checked the account where I saved money for our living expenses, I saw that $10,000 had been taken out. This account was mostly handled by me and meant to cover the cost of living that Charles and I shared. It was a significant amount, and I couldn't recall withdrawing it myself. It seemed inevitable that Charles was the one who had taken it out. That evening, when Charles returned home, I confronted him about it. "Hey, $10,000 are gone from our living expenses account. Do you know what happened to the money?" "Yeah, I lent it to my mom. She was in some trouble," he replied casually, confirming that Charles had indeed lent the money to my mother-in-law, Lisa. "And you didn't think to inform me beforehand?" "It's all right, though. It's money I earned, so it's not a big deal. We have savings, so losing that amount won't hurt us. If Lisa needed help, I understand why you did it, but it would have been nice to hear about it from you first. After all, the account is for both of us. If it had been his own personal account from when he was single, it would have been acceptable. But withdrawing a large sum from our joint account without discussing it was a bit too much." When I sighed heavily at Charles's selfishness, he frowned and gave me an irritated look. Fine. I'll tell you next time." Charles dismissed me, clearly annoyed, and quickly walked away to the bathroom. I felt uneasy about the situation. He hadn't acted like this when we first got married. He used to listen to me sincerely. Is this how relationships change over time? A few days later, I had no choice but to visit my in-laws' house to deliver a package that had been mistakenly delivered to our address. "Oh, Megan, thanks for making the trip all the way here. Why don't you come inside since you've come all this way?" I had planned to just drop off the package at the door, but I couldn't refuse my parents-in-law's invitation, so I ended up in their living room, having tea. While there, I couldn't help but notice various luxurious items, expensive cosmetics, glamorous clothes, health products. Oh my, our wonderful son gave these to me as gifts. Since there was $10,000 in the bank account anyway, it seemed natural to spend it this way. However, knowing that Lisa needed money and Charles had lent her that exact amount, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that all of it had been spent on her luxury items. As I quietly sipped my tea, not able to muster a smile, my in-laws' cheerful expressions faded, replaced by a look of concern that seemed almost threatening. "Our son is so kind and thoughtful, showering me with gifts. But what about you? Are you being a good wife to him? There's something suspicious going on." "We've heard things, my father-in-law said, his tone implying accusation. "He's always blamed by you for spending money on me," my mother-in-law chimed in. Now it all makes sense. They looked at me with apprehension, as if Charles had painted himself as a victim for doing something generous. I started feeling increasingly weary of both my in-laws and my husband. I never expected to be treated so poorly and overlooked like this. Finally, the idea of divorce began to take shape in my mind. I thought that if I left him, I could go back to my parents' home and use the savings from my passive income to help rebuild their lives. My parents' home is a two-story house that was built over 30 years ago, before my brother was born. It used to accommodate our family of 5, but after my brother and I moved out, it became too large and difficult for my parents, who have trouble with their legs despite some modifications like ramps and handrails. A smaller single-story house would be much more suitable and comfortable for them. I immediately called my parents to discuss my plan to divorce Charles and rebuild their home. Surprisingly, they weren't shocked by the divorce news and were thrilled about the idea of renovating their house. Over the phone, they eagerly listened to my plans. "I'm so grateful that you're thinking of renovating it for us. Thank you. Even if we won't live there long, it's okay because you can inherit the house as it was built using your own earnings." "All right then, I'll start preparing and planning it step by step." "Don't worry, take it easy." My dad and mom's reassuring words lifted my spirits. So I began the process of renovating my parents' house, waiting to hear back from the construction company when suddenly Charles confronted me. "How could you use our savings to build a house without consulting me?" Sitting across from each other at the living room table, Charles slammed his fist down and yelled at me, completely disregarding my feelings. Well, my parents will be living in the new house. No, that's not possible because it was built specifically for my parents. You used our joint funds to build it, so my parents have a right to live there. Are you expecting 4 people to squeeze into that small one-story house? Shut up. Just hand over the house to me, Charles yelled, banging the table loudly. I knew if I didn't mention my passive income, things would escalate even further. So I made up my mind to come clean. Actually, I have passive income. I've actually been saving from the real estate my grandparents left me as a gift. I've used that passive income to pay for the house, so none of our shared money was used. As I admitted this, feeling guilty for breaking my promise to my grandparents, Charles in front of me shook his shoulders and began banging the table even harder. What kind of wife hides her income? You're playing with my money and hiding yours like this. As his anger flared and his face turned red, I realized why my grandparents had advised me to keep my passive income secret. Perhaps they already knew what kind of person Charles was. I'll take the house as part of the divorce settlement. And remember, the house you built as my wife is also mine. I'm the head of this family, and if you defy me, I'll divorce you. I felt nothing but despair at Charles's demands and was thoroughly fed up with him. How could I have lived with someone like him without knowing who he truly was? I had planned to use my passive income when we might no longer rely solely on Charles's earnings. It was meant as a safety net in case I couldn't work due to injury or illness. I had intended to save it to sustain our life together and share it with Charles when the time was right. But now, I have no intention of spending that money on him anymore. Feel free to take it. I stood up, leaving the table and the house. I couldn't bear to be near Charles any longer. I decided to spend the night at a business hotel to calm down, intending to return home the next day. However, when I returned the next morning, Charles greeted me with a smug smile. He approached me, holding a sheet of paper he had concealed behind his back. It was divorce papers already filled out. You lied about having passive income, didn't you? You pretended to have it to cover up the fact that you were actually taking money from our joint property, didn't you? Charles' accusation bewildered me. I had told him the truth sincerely. I hadn't lied. It's true, I have passive income. Here you go again. I know you can't live without me, Charles sneered as he forcefully placed the divorce papers into my hand. Let me know when I can move in, okay? I'm off for a drink. With that, he patted my shoulder and left, humming in a cheerful mood. In that moment, I finally saw Charles for who he truly was. He hadn't changed. He had always looked down on me since the beginning of our marriage. He never truly considered my feelings. I wasted no time. I packed my things, completed the divorce papers right then and there, and left. I decided to stay with my parents temporarily and explain everything to them. We agreed that I would live with them until the new house was ready. The next day, I was dismayed to find my phone filled with missed calls from Charles. Shortly after, it rang again. Reluctantly, I answered, hoping this would be the last conversation I ever had with him. Hello. Hey. All your stuff is gone, you know. My husband's impatient tone left me with nothing but questions. He was the one who initiated the divorce, so why was he acting so flustered now that I had actually left? Huh? We're getting divorced, so it's normal for my things to be gone. I won't be coming back, so feel free to use the empty space however you like. I wondered if he sensed something different in my tone. There was silence from my husband for a few moments. Finally, it seemed he had realized that I indeed had passive income. Then, after another pause, he spoke in a surprisingly gentle voice I had never heard before. Hey, could you let my parents live in the new house? I don't mind staying with your parents, please. I already told you it's a small one-story house. Please understand. I plan to surprise my parents with it. His request left me speechless. What was he thinking? Wanting to give away a house he didn't even buy and call it a surprise? It seemed reckless beyond belief. You don't care about our savings at all, do you? I've been stressing over the money I give you as an allowance and what we save for living expenses, trying hard to manage everything. That's beside the point here. You're careless with money and leave all the hassle to others. Then act like you did everything yourself when it comes to your parents, right? As I had meticulously prepared everything for my parents, my husband suddenly fell silent, fueling my frustration even more. It's shallow of you to act like you orchestrated it all and give the house to your parents. Ultimately, you've been trying to exploit my good intentions and take control of what's rightfully mine. There's no justification for you to trample on my feelings and intentions like this. I won't hand over the house I built with all my heart and soul for my parents just so you can show off to yours. I firmly rejected Charles's proposal, and he began to loudly rant in response. But husbands and wives are supposed to help each other. We're not married anymore, are we? I've already filed for divorce. On the same day my husband, now my ex-husband, handed me the divorce papers, I submitted them to the city office. He had wanted the divorce so eagerly, and I felt it was best to move on quickly. I was already in the process of reverting all the paperwork to what it was before we were married. My ex-husband said in disbelief, "Yeah, you've already filed. Why act surprised when you're the one who wanted the divorce?" "Oh, I didn't expect you to actually leave. Let's start over. Let's talk and try to make things work this time." How could he suggest such a thing now? This is a man who used our savings for his own mother, threatened divorce, and mocked me until the very end. I had no desire to reconcile with someone like him. "No, thank you. Please give my regards to your parents," I said cheerfully before hanging up on Charles. The next day, I continued to receive voicemails and messages from him, insisting we could start over and professing his love. But I sensed his motives were only about my property and wealth. To sever all ties, I promptly blocked him and his family from contacting me. Meanwhile, the new house was completed, and my parents and I moved in, enjoying our newfound comfort. Later, I met a mutual friend who knew Charles as well. I explained that we had divorced. My friend expressed sympathy and shared what had been happening with Charles and his family. Firstly, my ex-husband abruptly submitted his resignation letter at work, claiming he no longer needed to work hard because he had acquired real estate. He then disappeared, making himself unreachable to his colleagues. However, the next day, he apparently tried to retract his resignation. His bosses understandably reprimanded him for vanishing without notice and the disruption caused by his sudden resignation letter. The company questioned him about his behavior, but Charles couldn't admit he was relying on my income, so he attempted to fabricate an explanation. Eventually, though, the truth about our divorce came to light and his lies were exposed. As a result, the company refused to reconsider his employment. Charles, who mocked my passive income as probably fake, was actually trying to benefit from my earnings and impressed his parents by giving them a house as a gift. He didn't consider me or our future at all. When I think about that, I no longer have any feelings for my ex-husband. In fact, I feel relieved. I heard that he returned to his parents' home, where they must have been tough on him because he's now scrambling to find a new job. However, his departure from his last job has made it difficult for him to secure employment. It's safe to say he's facing the consequences of his actions. As for me, I live happily with my parents in a home I built myself. I have a job that I love, and I'm enjoying life. I had been saving my passive income for Charles and our future, but now I'll use it to support those who have supported me.